In this age of political chaos, you may be wondering, how can I have a good relationship with people I disagree with? Let's talk about it. Welcome to Polar Opposites. My name is Justin Conder. A couple of weeks ago, my wife and I invited over a few friends for dinner and to view one of my podcast episodes. It was titled, How to Not Be a Leader in Politics. I gotta admit, I was a little nervous to be showing this episode to one of these friends because he was a Republican. And if you remember from that episode, I was very critical of Donald Trump's handling of the January 6th attacks. But we went ahead and we watched it anyways, and I got to admit that I was a little surprised at his reaction. Not only was he respectful and not confrontational whatsoever, but he had some great things to say to help me improve this channel. And to think that I was so nervous about showing this episode to this friend, and looking back on it, he's a great guy. I don't know what I was so nervous about. He's just not the kind of person to get upset about these kinds of things. That political interaction went so good. Our relationship is stronger than ever. As a matter of fact, later that night, we had actually planned a trip with that exact same friend. So the moral of the story is not to go on vacation with people that you politically disagree with. But it goes to show that you don't have to be confrontational about your political discussions with others. The topic of having better political discussions is something that we all need to hear more about. Clearly, myself included. Because unfortunately, far too often, these conversations end very poorly. And had my friend not applied some of the tactics that we're going to talk about in this video, it could have been very damaging to our relationship. Before we get started with all of that, the reason we even need to have this conversation is because many of us have not learned how to discuss politics. It's not our fault. If you think back to school, we never had any classes or any teachers tell us this is how you handle a political conversation. There is nothing easy about improving the way you interact with people politically. It's just something that you got to work on consistently. It's something I'm still working on myself as well. The first thing that we need to keep in mind is it's important to be constructive. And here's what I mean by that. Most people see a debate or a political discussion as a battle to be won. It's pretty clear why that is. We use so much war jargon when we're talking about having a political debate. Stuff like attack, counterattack, winning, losing, fighting. The problem with this is that war is destructive, and having a political discussion, even being compared to war, changes our mindset on what that interaction is going to be like. By using these warlike analogies, we are subtly applying that political discussions have destructive tendencies. But should we really look at debate as if there are winners and losers? In his TED Talk, Dave Sumner said that the better analogy is to compare discussions and arguments as a dance. When you're dancing, you're not trying to ignore the other person. No, you're trying to communicate and try to match their style and their intensity. The same way goes for when we have political discussions. You don't need to agree with everything that that person is saying. But remember, you are working with that person to gain a better view. The number one reason we absolutely should talk politics is to learn something new from someone with a different perspective. So one of the best ways to be constructive is to give up trying to win the argument. Or as Socrates put it, to win, we must lose. Only once we have gotten rid of this fighting mentality can we learn, grow, and start to be constructive. You never know. One of the people that you're arguing with could end up becoming one of your closest allies. It is hard to get into this constructive mindset because our minds are literally wired to resist change when our political beliefs are under attack. A study at USC shows that when people get their political positions challenged, their brains automatically trigger a deep emotional response. It is showed that the part of the brain that is triggered is responsible for deep personal identifications. So when people have their political views challenged, it's as though you are challenging a part of who they are. The same goes for us. That's why you likely can't help but get angry and frustrated when somebody attacks you politically. Which brings us to point number 2. It's important to keep control over our minds and our bodies. Have you ever been in an argument where somebody is attacking you just relentlessly, and they're talking super fast, super loud, and you're not able to get a single word in? When people do this, it is extremely uncomfortable, and as humans, we tend to shut down. That's why a lot of poor salesmen use this tactic to try and trick people into making irrational decisions. The same can happen in a political disagreement. How does the conversation go when people do this to you? Most likely, probably not very good. Nobody learns anything, and you walk away from that discussion never wanting to talk to that person ever again. So, if it doesn't work for you, it's not going to work on other people to change their minds. You may be wondering, but Justin, I am getting angry for a good reason. I have what is called righteous anger. Now, you've got to be very careful about righteous anger, because sometimes it's good to get angry about specific things. But if you unleash that anger on somebody in an unhealthy way, rarely are you going to ever change that person's perspective. And this righteous anger, over time, is going to consume you if you don't get it under control. Whether you're the one attacking or the one being attacked, it's good to get those emotions under control. Do your best not to take offense and create an environment for good discussion to flourish. You can do this by slowing down the pace of the discussion. Ruth Bader Ginsburg famously once said, "Fight for things you care about, but do so in a way that invites others to join you." And that brings us to point number 3. Don't assume that you know what that person's perspective is. Ask questions. You may find, just like me, that when people make harsh judgments and assumptions about what you believe politically, more times than not, they end up being false. I've been accused of believing a lot of things that I don't actually believe in. Some of the more extreme and funny examples are I've been called a Russian spy, I've been called a fascist, and I've been called a communist. None of those things are even close to what I believe. But even if you're not making an extreme assumption quite like that of me, usually the people who have made assumptions are off. I've made mistakes of assuming people's political stances before, and I have to stop and ask myself, what do I stand to gain by assuming what that person believes? Even if you are fairly confident that you know where that person stands politically, there is no harm in asking them to clarify their position for you. Accusing people of believing in bad things and bad ideologies rarely leads to anything constructive in the conversation. So, just don't do it. It can also be ultimately damaging to your own reputation when that person has to stop and correct you on what you don't understand about them. The better thing to do is to ask questions that prompt learning and understanding. Ask them what they think. Ask them to clarify that position. Ask them how they got to that position in the first place. And then, most importantly, listen to them. Try and understand and learn what you can from this person. A word of caution: if you're going to ask questions that you're planning on turning against them and using the information against them later on, I would advise against this. I've done this in my own personal life. Trust me, people see right through this. It's better to be curious and respectful. But by asking good questions and then listening, I personally guarantee that you will be ready to appropriately respond to this person. My friend that I was so worried about offending over my spicy Trump take Apply these 3 principles beautifully. If the person you're talking politics with is a rational person, this will make for a much better experience. Uncomfortable question here. What if you apply all of these things and the person you're discussing politics with still yells at you, is still rude, passive-aggressive, and bullies you around? Then what? If this conversation we had today put an end to all of your political confrontations from here on out for the rest of your life, I would be shocked. Some people are still going to be jerks. That is the reality of life. That is why it's so important to learn how to properly engage with people. All you can do is be the reasonable adult in the room. And you might get attacked for that. Remember that some people don't deserve as much time as you give them. Some people don't deserve any of your time. You have to make that judgment call depending on the dynamics of your specific relationships. Politics can be uncomfortable to talk about, but by no means should we stop talking about politics. Becoming a better conversationalist takes consistent practice. Be patient with yourself and be patient with others. This is one of the most important skills to learn. So go talk about politics, engage in those kinds of conversations, and make the world a better place to live in. Thank you for joining me here on Polar Opposites. It's been a privilege to have you on here today. The best way to support this channel is by sharing it with family and friends. Also, liking, subscribing, and following this channel for more great content just like this. And remember, when you learn better, do better. We'll see you next time.